Welcome back to Feature Fanatics. Today we're talking about the multi-talented Dev Patel and reviewing the highlights of his career as well as his hit action movie and directorial debut now in theaters. Joining us today is a film writer and awards editor for Awards Buzz and writer for Cinema Daily US, Awards Radar, and The Film Experience, and has interviewed plenty of celebrities from the newest films that are now in theaters, streaming services, and so on. Joining us today is Abe Friedtanzer. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Let's get into our main event, which is Mr. Dev Patel. Dev Patel basically broke out when he did Slumdog Millionaire, which won Best Picture. I'm not sure if that was actually his first film. It was his first film credit, which is kind of wild. It's an amazing first film credit to have. Not a great second film credit to have is The Last Airbender. But after that, he did some drama films, some blockbusters. The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. I haven't seen those films yet, but he was in Chappie. He was in The Man Who Knew Infinity, which is a movie that I actually really like. In my opinion, is a great biopic. Hotel Mumbai, which is also a film I really like. Personal History of David Copperfield. And even worked most recently with Wes Anderson on a short film called The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. But I personally left out the films from that sentence that I feel are the highlights of his career. And those are the films that we're going to be diving deepest into, starting with Slumdog Millionaire, which, again, was his first movie credit. And he literally must have been, I guess, 17 when he was cast and did this film. And it's the tale of Jamal, who is on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and suspected of cheating. And then we go through his life story that cleverly connects to him knowing all the different answers. And it's sort of this empowering story, but it's also a story of like rags to riches, crime, achieving the impossible. And the awards absolutely loved it. It won 8 Oscars, including picture and director. So yeah, Abe, when was the first time that you saw Slumdog Millionaire?
That was the first press junket I ever covered. I was still in college, and I went to a round table with Danny Boyle and Dev Patel. And this was before like smartphones were big. So I remember he came in and he was like recording us with his camera because he was so excited to be doing this. Because I think he was on Skins, the TV show before that, but otherwise this really was his breakout. And so I saw the film in a small screening room in New York City. I really enjoyed it and then just got to see it. And so it was very cool to see him and just see how excited he was and how just because he's great in the film, but in person he was a lot shyer I think then than he is now because now he's obviously very confident. He's had a great career. But I mean that was 2008. It was a long time ago. He was great. I really enjoyed it. He didn't get nominated for an Oscar. I think he probably came close. But it was a very enjoyable performance and certainly a good ability to carry a film, even if you don't call it necessarily a star turn. I think he really knows what he's doing, and that helped to launch his career from there.
For everyone watching, this is actually really poetic because I had no idea that that was your first ever press junket when I asked you to do the topic of Dev Patel with me, but that is absolutely awesome. Again, it's a wonderful mix of many different things. Bit of drama, sort of like look into the different politics of India and growing up in the horrific poverty. I actually watched this, I think, maybe a day or two after I saw Lion for the first time. So this was early 2017. And I saw Lion in theaters, and I think I just liked him in it so much. I thought he was so good that I was like, I got to see Slumdog Millionaire because I know that that was his breakout and it was a Best Picture winner and everything. And I think he's wonderful in this too. And it was also crazy for me to realize that he was so young when he did it because I by then it was 2017 and I'd just known him from a lot of things. And he's so good in this. Again, I do think it's a star-making performance. And I think it's, again, a lovely sort of epic story. There's this one scene, by the way, that always horrified my parents, which is where he came across these characters, the young Jamal, who would like remove kids' eyes to like make them beg and so on. It's such a like it's not necessarily graphic, but the implications of it are like so horrific. And when he runs away and like like sprays them with whatever that was. It was like so satisfying. And it's also got a little brotherhood in there. I also really love that about the film.
Yeah.
One other part that I do really love is Irfan Khan, who passed away a couple years ago, shockingly. But I thought he was so terrific as the police inspector, where he's not like over the top, but he's very much enjoyable in this threatening, authoritative sort of way. And he was just absolutely excellent in a lot of different things.
Yeah, no, Irfan was great. I saw him in a movie called Puzzle a few years ago at Sundance. He was great in it. It's just he had some really great pieces of his career, and this is one of them.
Yeah, and then Frida Pinto is also really great in this one. I don't know how much she like has done now in Hollywood. I know that she was in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but has she been in much lately? I'm not sure.
She's been in some things. I don't think she's been necessarily quite as visible, maybe as Dev, but I think Slumdog has a lot of fans. I know that it people credit it a lot with exposing Hollywood to Bollywood and just sort of getting to appreciate a different culture of film. And I think RRR is another recent example, obviously of a different film industry, but still Indian cinema really getting out there to the world in a different way, which is cool to see.
Yeah, which is also interesting to look at the impact of the film, particularly again like bridging the gap between Hollywood and Bollywood. There were some critics of that who were like who were saying like, but it's still a film in British English or so on. Apparently, as I'm reading from like reactions from India, um, but it's also like a film that many people responded to positively because there wasn't ever a movie with an all non-white cast like this to get this recognition in Hollywood and in the awards the way it did.
Definitely a breakthrough, certainly.
I do feel like it has a bit of rewatchability to it because I do think it leaves you like feeling good and fun on that high of like the climax where there's the like the gangsters and then he's like brought back from jail to do like the final clue. I feel like it's a very like not quotable, but like memorable sort of moment at the very end with the last question. Would you say this has like a very rewatchable factor to it? I haven't like properly rewatched it, but
This is one that I enjoy whenever I see a clip, and if I saw one now, because it's been a few years, obviously, I would definitely enjoy seeing because it was fun. It was really enjoyable and just a very cleverly assembled film that really is a serious drama in some ways, but also an adventure in others.
yeah. And then, of course, it won 8 Academy Awards, which is no Best Picture winner has won that many since. I don't know if any film has won 8 or more since, which is kind of crazy. Um, it's the 15th movie ever to win 8 or more, apparently. And then the 11th Best Picture Oscar winner without a single acting nomination until Parasite, which is a fun fact. And then also the first film using digital cinematography to win Best Cinematography, which is also an interesting feat. So it won Best Picture, Director, Adapted Screenplay, Cinematography, Film Editing, Original Score, Original Song, and Sound Mixing. Shout out, because Jai Ho, in terms of original songs, that is one of the most fun ones from, I think, this last century. I think it's like broken out to the mainstream a little bit for people who don't even know what Slumdog Millionaire is, but it's also just so easy to like pop on and listen to. And I think that ending dance scene with all the cast members is like this burst of joy at the end of this emotional ride of a film that I think is sort of perfect and sells the film home for like why people enjoy it so much.
I think it's also something that is very common in Bollywood that American audiences aren't used to, and so people saw it and were like, this is so fun, and it's something that it really
Yeah.
is a big part of the industry there, and so it's nice to be exposed to that as long as we don't feel, as you said, some people do that it's exploitative of the culture by making a very
Hmm.
Western film about this. But I enjoyed it. I think it had a great cultural impact. I hope people think so too.
Yeah. Then how do you think it holds up in terms of like it winning Best Picture the year that it did, all those Oscar wins?
So that again, I was in college, so it was a very busy time for me to like really get into film for the first time. And so I think I liked it best that year out of the nominees.
Hmm.
So I'm fine with it. I also know that I referenced it recently when I was predicting the Oscars this year, that like Oppenheimer was pretty much as locked as something like Slumdog Millionaire, which hasn't
Slumdog
really
Millionaire.
happened since then, which is interesting. I mean, obviously in some senses it's more interesting when it's not. There's more of a race, but I'm totally okay with it having one. I really enjoyed it, and again, it holds that special place in my memory because it was the first junket I went to, and so I feel like it's hard not to be more favorable towards a film, not even just liking it, but just the lasting impression of it when you do interviews for it. As long as they're positive
Hmm.
conversations, it's like that extra, like, oh, that was a fun thing to think about. So that's nice.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the best picture winners that people look a lot more positively on. It was nominated alongside Benjamin Button, Frost Nixon, Milk, and The Reader. And I feel like again, being a special movie um, with again like an all Indian cast, it very much earned that moment. Benjamin Button is maybe one of my favorite movies, but again, love that this film won. This was also when they only had five that they could nominate, so there are some films that people argue should have been nominated that year, like The Dark Knight or Wall-E, that were not. I think Doubt was that year as well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that was just an incredible year. And then, where do you think it holds up for you among your favorite Danny Boyle movies? Because that's one where a lot of people could have different ones. Because he doesn't make the same movie once. Let's just say that.
It's definitely up there. I definitely like it. I'm not sure I've seen as much of his filmography as perhaps I should to offer like definitive rankings, but I definitely think it's a good one. And it shows again, if people, some people might have problems with how he sort of takes this other industry and brings it, to Europe and the US in this way, I think he does a great job of adapting something else, and that's really cool to see. What about you?
Yeah, I'd ultimately say wow, because I love Steve Jobs. This might probably be like his best and his most monumental work. But man, it would be hard to pick between this and Steve Jobs because I love that film so much. I'd probably put it over like Sunshine and 28 Days Later. Um, yeah, I would say it's close between this and Steve Jobs. Maybe Steve Jobs is still like my absolute favorite, but also because I saw that one when it came out. This one I watched like a lot later.
Right. When you see
Um,
something definitely affects your perspective, especially when you've heard a lot about it. Because I think I had probably heard this was good, Slumdog, but I don't know where I would have heard that because it was so new and I wasn't tuned into the industry, this, with what's happening as much back then.
yeah, for sure. So with that, let's talk about another movie that was nominated for Best Picture that Dev Patel was in and was also a really huge moment for him in his career. And that's Lion, directed by Garth Davis, who most recently, I think, directed Foe, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken,
Yeah.
uh, with Saoirse Ronan, Paul Mescal, and Aaron Pierre. Admittedly, a movie I did not hate as much as most people,
I
but
agree. It
definitely
wasn't
nowhere
it
near.
wasn't it wasn't good, but it was not as bad as everyone said it
It
was.
was not awful, I would
Yeah.
say. But yeah, I agree with you there. But definitely nowhere near as good as Lion. Let's just say that.
No, Lion is
This
great.
is also this is also an important movie to talk about with Dev Patel because it's the movie that made him an Academy Award nominee. If he was too much of a breakout or a new face for him to get nominated right away for Slumdog Millionaire, here he was getting all the awards attention. Golden Globe, Critics' Choice nominations, won the BAFTA for actor in a supporting role that year, and he was nominated for the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. This is a film that is the true story of Saru Brearley, based on his memoir A Long Way Home, about how he got lost from his brother and mother in India when he was 5, and then adopted by an Australian family, and actually used Google Earth to find his birth mother years and years later. And yeah, this movie's wonderful. I don't know what else to say. I watched this movie shortly after it got nominated for Best Picture. I saw it in theaters. Um, it was a crowded theater, which was interesting because it was like mid-February and it had been out for, I think, a couple weeks by then. It was like a Sunday night. But there was almost like no seats left in the theater, which is not something we see anymore with a movie like Lion. Um, but I just really loved it from the way it starts, even just with the beautiful score. Um, from now Oscar winner Volker Bertelmann, who later won for composing All Quiet on the Western Front, and the cinematography from Greg Fraser over like the drone shots of the opening credits. And then the movie's basically split into two halves with Sunny Pawar and Dev Patel each playing Saru in the different halves. But there's something about the emotion of the story and the scale of it that I think really hits home. Also, a story about, I think stories about like an adopted child and their connection with their adoptive family is always something lovely to see. But also the way his heritage and the different parts of his life sort of play into who Saru is by the time we meet him as Dev Patel. Sort of like the fact that now the first half is sort of so distant in his memory that he's barely the same person, but he's still like it's still like always there for him. Like it was just such an interesting sort of perspective, and the way it was so beautifully portrayed. Even when it's just sort of focusing on his romance with Rooney Mara, I think you really love and are fascinated by this character of Saru. The film really does him justice, but also just from a technical perspective. And yeah.
The sort of simplicity of this grand story, the fact that it's like, oh, I'll just look Google Earth, and it's like that technical piece somehow like molded into such a marvelous, all-encompassing thing, which was great. I also thought Rooney Mara was very good, and the child actors also.
Mhm,
So it
mhm,
it really did work for me, even if I wish I remembered it more vividly. But again,
mhm.
it's been a number of years since then.
Yeah, so Sunny Pawar is the one who plays young Saru. I want to look this up as to how old he is, but I'm pretty sure. Okay, it says he's about 16 now, which means he must have been about 7 when he did this movie. And I want to say that's an incredible performance from
Yeah.
him. There are many saying they would have also nominated him back then, which
Oh
I
yeah.
respect.
Mhm.
This was also Nicole Kidman got nominated for an Oscar, and I think even if you haven't seen that movie, you'll see that scene as an Instagram reel now, because now every movie scene that people like becomes an Instagram reel, which is where she says, where she basically tells them that like they chose not to have kids and rather to adopt a kid who needed a better life, like him and his brother. I think is a really beautiful moment, and just the love that Nicole Kidman and David Wenham show him as their parents. But again, I think the scale of this one is so powerful. Again, you sort of see like the difficulties and the fear that young Saru goes through, and also how common that was for just a kid to get lost and not be able to um, find his home like that, which is also like I guess a bit of a look into what India was for him back there. I guess similarly to Slumdog. But again, I think Patel just really commands the screen when he's in character as Saru. Fun fact that I learned when I read an interview with Patel around the time the movie came out: the first thing they shot for this movie was the climax of the film, which I guess spoilers, but not really because it's a true story, when Dev Patel reunites with his birth mother, which is a very powerful scene, and again brings this journey to a close in such a beautiful way, because the whoever plays the mother was beautiful, and then you sort of see him walking in where he grew up, and like he has a vision of his young self. I think just everything comes home about this story. Like you said, it's um it's a film that's simplistic but sort of counts on the execution. And I think again, in the world of us having so many biopics now, it would be easy for a story like this to just sort of fall between the cracks. But the fact is that this was nominated for 6 Oscars, including picture and screenplay and so on, is I think ultimately because of how universal the emotion was of like him sort of finding his way home. And I think this is Garth Davis's first movie.
Yeah,
No?
I think he was nominated for DGA awards for just regular best director and for first time director, but he unfortunately did not get nominated for an Oscar for best director. But yes, first
Did
movie.
he win for first director?
I
Did he
believe
win
so.
for the best first time filmmaker? I
I
think he
think so.
would have. I think he did. I'm curious now. Here, first time feature film. Let's see. Yes, it was Garth Davis for Lion.
There we go.
Um, nice. So he was actually nominated that year alongside Kelly Freeman Craig for Edge of 17, Tim Miller for Deadpool, Nate Parker for Birth of a Nation, and Dan Trachtenberg for 10 Cloverfield Lane. I love that Deadpool was nominated for that category. Um,
And I think,
but
unfortunately,
yeah,
his Oscar spot got swapped for Mel Gibson for Hacksaw Ridge, if I remember correctly.
yeah, I guess Mel Gibson had also been nominated for like the Golden Globe that year or something. Which Hacksaw Ridge is a great film. I would say I love it like equally to Lion. Um, but not a comp. That's not the story about like which one deserved it more. I also remember being sort of upset that Tom Ford wasn't nominated for Nocturnal Animals that year, which is a movie that was like shut out a lot more that year.
I
But yeah, that was a
I dis
competitive directing category.
I will say I disliked Nocturnal Animals a lot, but I loved A Single Man. So I would have given him the Oscar for A Single
Uh,
Man for directing, but Nocturnal Animals I'd rather forget about.
uh,
Although I will
interesting.
note that in a connection with those, that Michael Shannon is an interesting Oscar case who has achieved two Oscar nominations with almost no precursors. One was for Revolutionary Road, one was for Nocturnal Animals. And the first one for Revolutionary Road, one of the would-be contenders that he knocked out for Best Supporting Actor was Dev Patel in Slumdog Millionaire. So an interesting
That's
connection with
hilarious.
all this.
Yeah. Wow, full circle. I will say Nocturnal Animals is I'm probably the one of the biggest fans of that film because I know it's a film that most people are either positive about or like shy away from. But yeah, anyway, back to the main topic at hand. Dev Patel and Michael Shannon both lost that year to Mahershala Ali for Moonlight, which I do think is a win that holds up. I
Mhm.
loved him in Moonlight. I wouldn't have I'm not upset with that at all. I do love that Dev Patel at least got the BAFTA win, which is nice. Which they do gravitate towards a lot of British people, and the movie also won adapted screenplay at the BAFTAs. Yeah, overall, Lion is a film that I think is even. I don't know if I would say even more accessible than Slumdog Millionaire, but I would say like not as off-putting with like the violence. Like I could recommend Lion to pretty much everyone. I believe it's PG-13, so it's not got like it's very heavy, but it's not difficult necessarily. But also, film lovers, it's a movie that teaches you a lot about, again, like telling a simple story in such a massive way, but also in a way that no matter who you are, what your background or age is, can sort of understand and sympathize and connect to this main character. I honestly think that's a very good segue, though, into talking about a movie that I believe is rather inaccessible for a lot of wide audiences, but still a highlight among Dev Patel's career, in my opinion, and that is The Green Knight, a movie that I watched in theaters when it came out in 2021. Almost an empty theater because it was like a weekday and it was like 9 something p.m. But me and my friends, I have a couple friends who are also like avid fans of most things that A24 rack out. And this is directed by David Lowery, who also, of course, directed A Ghost Story, Pete's Dragon, The Old Man and the Gun, most recently Peter Pan and Wendy, which very, very skippable from what I saw of it. But this is like a very unique take on the Arthurian legends from the perspective of Sir Gawain, who goes on this fantastical, surreal adventure to fulfill his part in this game that he has with the titular Green Knight, and it's could unofficially be a Christmas movie. um, and also has some great appearances from Joel Edgerton, Alicia Vikander, and Sean Harris. Did you watch this one in theaters? I'm guessing. Did you see it in early screening? Did you just go in theaters? Where did you first see it?
I did go at an early screening. I actually think I have a copy of the script somewhere over there that I should have had ready to show right now.
Oh
But this
wow,
is not a film that works for me. I did not like this film at
I would
all.
like to see it.
I knew it was going to come up, and I was. But yeah, I did not like this film. It did not work for me. I don't have anything against Dev Patel in it. I think he's the strongest part. But there's a moment in some films where it's like, here's the premise, and if you like don't like it or don't see it as sort of not valid, but like it just doesn't click, the whole movie after that doesn't work. And so for me, this was was not a positive experience compared with the two that we've been raving about, and even Monkey Man, which we'll get to. This is the bottom for me
Yes.
of Dev's films. I get why people like it, I guess, but
Wow.
it's just really it's not for me. There's so much in their catalog that it's hard to really say because there's some stuff I love and I'm so into, and other things it's just they when you go in that it's going to be an interesting experience, and I appreciate that, but sometimes it's a little much for it to
Are
stay
you a
on
fan
screen.
of a ghost story? Like talking about David Lowery?
I haven't actually seen a ghost story. Part
Ooh.
of the reason is I gravitate away from horror films, and while I know this may not technically be a horror film,
Yeah,
its title was enough not to pique my interest at the time. But I have heard
I
good things.
understand. Yeah, A Ghost Story is not a horror movie at all. It's a drama or like a meditative drama. But again, if the style of The Green Knight or the pacing of it didn't work, A Ghost Story is a bit of that with even less dialogue. I would say this is actually a movie that I really like, and for me, even gets better over time. I think it takes again a unique approach to this legendary lore. But from what I've heard, is actually sort of faithful to the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight legend. The cinematography, first of all, is I think beautiful, and honestly, watching it in a somewhat big but empty theater room late at night, sort of adds to like the magical realism element of it, where it feels very much like nature, but the practical, fantastical effects still pop out at you. And I think that brings home to the sort of connection of like between man and earth that I think probably from the perspective of the people who didn't like it, you included, may have been a little pretentious for you, but I do think it's an interesting theory that maybe the Green Knight represents man's connection with Earth, for example, arrogantly taking, and Sir Gawain's journey of sort of more patiently interacting with it. I think Dev Patel's performance in it is very patient. Again, to portray this, you have to be a very charismatic, heroic sort of figure, and I think he brings a righteous, sort of like very promising hero's journey sort of element to Sir Gawain. It shows that like he's the right person, like he has the nobility to be in this role, which I really love. And in terms of David Lowery's films, from what I've seen, I like this one more than the rest. I do love A Ghost Story, but the more I think about this one, the more it even goes further. So, could you talk a little more about where this movie lost you?
Just in that first big scene when you understand like what the premise is, what the challenge is, and what the promise is, it just I don't know if I didn't buy it. It just I was like, this is what this movie is. And from there, I remember also certain one scene where it like flashes forward, and then like you think you know what happened, and then it's like no, and it just sort of starts again. That kind of stuff just did not invite me the way I had hoped. I do remember where I saw at the Alamo Draft House in downtown Los Angeles, which I
Mm-hmm.
think I've only ever been to for this one screening, and it was a pretty crowded theater. It was obviously early in COVID, I think, but it was I don't know. It's just it I couldn't when a movie like loses me like that, I try very hard to be like, okay, let's see what else is here. But this one just did not offer that, and that was one that, unlike Slumdog Millionaire, where I was happy to see clips and all that, hearing all about this movie throughout the year about how great it was. Obviously, it didn't ultimately get any Oscar nominations, unfortunately for its fans. But I did not smile when I heard it being discussed throughout the year because it just again it did not win me over. And usually I do like movies and I try to only see stuff I think I'm gonna like. Obviously, I that's not always the case, but I try to go in with a positive attitude, and this one just
Mm-hmm.
didn't do it.
This movie was actually delayed a whole year because of COVID, and a lot of people were anticipating it for a long time. I remember the trailer played in front of A Quiet Place 2, which was like my first movie back in theaters after COVID. And I remember the trailer looking a lot more mainstream and action like, but knowing David Lowery, I'm like, okay, I don't buy this. I feel like it's gonna be a lot trippier and less action heavy than it looks, and I feel like maybe that might have put some people off. I'm sure that's again my friend, for example, who went with me loves this A24 kind of stuff, and even he was like, "Oh, that was a little weird for me. I'm not sure yet if I how I feel about it," which I completely understand. I watched it and I felt like again, it was like a King Arthur sort of legend. It marketed itself as one of the more accessible A24 movies. And when I came out, I was like, this is maybe one of the least accessible in their catalog. So I completely understand where it put people off. And there's a bit of a simplicity in that concept of like he dealt this blow to the Green Knight. But now a year later, he's just like, oh, I have to come back and meet him and probably face my doom. I get that there's a bit of an anticlimactic characteristic to that. But I think thematically and from a journey perspective, there's a lot of interesting things that come into it. I feel like there are some parts that are a little long, like the Joel Edgerton part in particular, but there's also parts like the part with Erin Kellyman where he has to like dive and find her head, like because she's a ghost or something, that are like trippy in the way that I kind of love. Or Barry Keoghan's whole like sus performance of like him being a guy that you just can't trust. I really enjoyed. But at the end, Gawain sort of comes home after failing to uphold his end of the deal, which is like he was supposed to let the Green Knight behead him. He gets scared, comes home, and the whole flash forward is this sort of unnoble life that he lives for the rest of his life, is that he becomes king, becomes corrupt, they lead a revolution against him and so on. And then it's revealed that this is a flash forward. Oh, he also like dumps Alicia Vikander, who plays two roles in the film, by the way, and like marries someone else. So yeah, and then that's revealed that that's actually a flash forward to his vision if he ran for his life and didn't do the heroic sort of noble thing. And he says, okay, I'm ready, and like embraces his bravery. And the Green Knight says, like, now off with your head, which I honestly was really transfixed by this ending, because once I realized that it was like, I don't know, the music with it and the editing of the montage I thought was like really powerful and trippy. And then when it makes that cut back to that scene with the close up on Dev Patel, it just really hit that ending home for me, because I understood the themes of what it was showing about him being about like what it really means to be heroic, or what it's seen as like knightly in, and some people even said it was about masculinity and so on. What I do think it does interestingly is leaves the ending up to interpretation. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but I sort of thought like, oh, this means that Gawain definitely dies at the end. But then a lot of people were like, oh no, when he says now off with your head, he meant to sort of teasingly like go off with your head with you, because he was sort of showing like, oh, congrats, you passed the test. So I think that's an interesting way of leaving it very much for interpretation. What do you think happened at the end?
I mean, I honestly, I said I remembered some of the movie. I had blocked a lot of that out. I think while sometimes mediocre films to me can have strong endings that I'm like, oh, okay, now I feel different. This one, I was just so frustrated, I think, by that point that it didn't salvage it for me. So I don't have anything deep to share about that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I knew I had it just sitting
Hey,
there
awesome.
staring.
That seems like a really interesting script to read, because it's also very much within the visual storytelling and the screen directions, um, and some scenes that are like mostly about the character expressions and so on. So whether or
Right.
not you like the movie, I feel like that's a very interesting script to look at,
It's actually
and I
sorry.
feel
It's
like it's
not.
an inviting ending to read.
It's not a script. It's actually like it's the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight with an introduction by David Lowery. So
Oh,
an
awesome!
interesting
I do
keepsake,
rest
which
my case, but
I do
very
not
cool.
revisit often, but I have this within arm's reach if I need it for
And it's
podcast
very
appearances.
cool. Yeah. So as we said, we do differ here. You're not as much of a fan of this one. It's a very daring film, not inviting for wide audiences for sure, but I am someone who has liked it more and more over time, and I think it's a really interesting watch. If you like something a little more daring and trippy in its filmmaking and in a very elevated fantasy sort of way.
Mhm.
But I think we'll agree very much more on our next one, which is Monkey Man. And he wrote and directed it, conceived the story as basically John Wick in Mumbai, according to him. Those are his words, is how he described it when he was like pitching it or describing the context before the movie got a lot of publicity. And back then, he was actually producing it for Netflix but Jordan Peele watched the film and said this deserves a theatrical release. And wow, thank you to Jordan Peele, because this is a great original action movie to watch in theaters. So you watched it at South by Southwest. Tell us more about that.
So I go to South by Southwest to see a ton of films. I see like 4 movies a day if I can. I don't
Wow,
necessarily
yeah.
go for the bigger movies like Monkey Man. That's not why I'm there. But of course I'm going to try to see them. And so I saw that, The Fall Guy, some other big things. And so I got there for a completely packed world premiere. The audience is very excited. Jordan Peele comes out to introduce Dev Patel, so everyone's thrilled about that. And he just walks out, and Dev Patel, and he's again a lot older and scruffier than he was back, with Slumdog, but he's just so excited to be there, so touched that everyone is there. And he's talking about how they like shot some of the movie on phones because their equipment didn't work. All the like, it's cool to feel like it's a very intimate experience, because this is an intensive production. Like there are a lot of very intensely choreographed scenes, and this is again, I like most festival movies I see that are going to streamers. I'm like, they're probably better in theaters. And so I think this one, it's great that it's not going to a streamer right away, and instead is going to be a big, experience like this, because seeing it with what I described as a very bloodthirsty crowd definitely enhanced the experience.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it wasn't lost in the crowd on Netflix, because I think it's better than the typical Netflix blockbuster. Like they've had their big ones like Extraction and The Gray Man and so on. I think this one's even better. Um, and I love that the way you described that just now, because he's sort of very humble about the experience. They went through so many different challenges. You would never believe that like on a mainstream production like this, they wouldn't hide that they had to like shoot a bit on their phones even, which is crazy to me. But yeah, it's a very like humble place that like even someone like Dev Patel, like filmmaking is such an intense sort of like nothing is certain sort of experience. And it really shows through the publicity that he's done in this movie that this was his dream project, and sort of his heart and soul was in this. And I really love that of all the Netflix action movies, this was the one that got its shot on the big screen. And it's great, honestly. It's for the most part well paced. Dev Patel's great in it. It's really well directed. I love the colors. I love the action choreography. I also love that it's not bombarding you with action scene after action scene, because it gives the character a place to breathe, gives him a bit of moral ambiguity, builds the political antagonists in a very interesting and grand sort of way. Um, and then when the action does come back, it feels like, oh, you're seeing something big and important, which I just really enjoyed Monkey Man. And yeah, what did you think? What was the reaction seeing it with the bloodthirsty crowd and so on?
I mean, I don't crave gore and violence quite that much, but I think that the action choreography was so strong that those scenes were very engaging, and that was nice. I also think, if I remember correctly, it was a 9:30 p.m. movie, and so while I'm used to seeing some films that late, like this is one that like gets you going at that time, which is great. It's not like gonna, you don't have to get into like a period
Mm-hmm.
setting and like really try to be focused. This one sort of grips your attention, which is nice. Was not my
Yeah.
favorite of the fest, not my favorite Dev Patel film, but it's a great debut, and I think there is really an audience for it. I think there are people who like this is exactly what they're coming to see, and that's what he delivered, and that's great. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I feel like it definitely has that audience element with some like ooh sort of moments. Like my audience had some moments like that. I mean, there's also I also watched this at 10 p.m., which is even later than you, I guess. Which not always my favorite time to watch a movie in theaters, but this one again gets you going. You're awake, you're engaged. But I also think it's well written, and I think one thing that action movies this year so far have been missing for me has been treating the audience like intelligent adults. There were a lot of action movies this year so far that didn't work for me, some of it which worked for others, particularly Godzilla and Roadhouse, which I particularly hated, and not to mention Madam Web. Argyle was quite disappointing. So besides Dune 2, this is the first real great action movie of the year for me. The exposition is actually interesting as opposed to other action movies this year, and just it's fun. I think the action is actually really impressive. Again, the way it's shot is a little like John Wick inspired, but also in a really cool way. Um, it's it's like got interesting lore to the world that it's setting up. The antagonists are not too layered or memorable, but they're interesting enough to make the sort of struggle to take them down interesting. And also the character's got a little moral ambiguity to him. Like he's not like some hero. He's just kind of doing the wrong things for the right reasons and for the right groups of people. And overall for me, it's a good watch in theaters because I think it also just appeals to a lot of action movie fans who are looking for a well paced time, and all the boxing scenes also blend in really well with the story. So I'd say it's a good theater watch too. So Abe, would you like to conclude? Shout out any other gems that Dev Patel has been in as we conclude?
So I did enjoy The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. I think that's a great light watch if you're looking for something nice and just pleasant. But I also would recommend his TV work. He's an Emmy nominee for his appearance in Modern Love, which is on Prime
Ooh.
Video. It's definitely a guest appearance, even though it's an anthology series, so he's just in one episode. But that's definitely worth checking out. But I also enjoyed him in The Newsroom, and I think The Morning Show has a lot more attention on it now because it's sort of bigger and lasting longer. But The Newsroom was a really great show. Aaron Sorkin really interesting, and he was just one of the members of the staff of this TV show. And there was some interesting stuff. I think his character's name was Neil, but definitely that's a show that unfortunately only lasted 3 seasons and probably could have gone to interesting places after that. But a different kind of turn for him, certainly different than his muscles in Monkey Man. But definitely worth checking out The Newsroom, which I believe should be streaming on Max because it's HBO, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
Yeah, that's also one where there's like a really famous clip on it um, that's like gotten a lot of YouTube views and stuff with Jeff Daniels, and I believe he won an Emmy or Golden Globe for the role. I heard good things about Modern Love, though I haven't seen it yet on Prime. Particularly, The Man Who Knew Infinity was a movie I saw in theaters back in 2016, and it's about a brilliant mathematician, Ramanujan, who he and Jeremy Irons have a great dynamic in the film. It's not some outstanding biopic, but it is really good, and he's great in it. It's sort of like A Beautiful Mind light, I would say, but I would recommend it if you like Dev Patel or Jeremy Irons or both. And then Hotel Mumbai was also one that I saw in theaters. It's got him, Armie Hammer, and it's also a true story about a hotel in Mumbai that was attacked in 2008 by terrorists, the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel. It's a really, really tense and heartbreaking sort of ensemble story that everyone is really good in. And this actor, Anupam Kher, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, who's a terrific Indian character actor, is particularly wonderful in this movie. Jason Isaacs is also in it. So if you want a thrilling film, I'd also recommend that one. Have you seen those, by the way?
I haven't actually seen either of those.
Oh, interesting. So that recommendation goes to you as well. But
I haven't seen either of those.
yeah,
No.
I have seen The Personal History of David Copperfield. Was a little slow for me. Didn't love it, but I know it has his fans. He got a Golden Globe nomination for that as well. But anyway, we cannot wait to see what Dev Patel does next in front of and behind the camera now that he's a skilled filmmaker as well. I'd just like to conclude, Abe, by you shouting out where you can be found on the internet.
You can find me Movies with Abe on Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube.
All right, awesome. Thanks again, Abe, for joining. I'm really glad that we could make it work and talk about this topic. And thanks again to Dev Patel, of course, and keep doing all the great stuff that you've been doing to make audiences happy. And thanks again to you guys for watching. Let us know if there's anything that we missed or any takes here that you agree or disagree with. Who do you agree with on The Green Knight? Have you watched Monkey Man? And as always, stay tuned for more.